Tell or ask me anything in the chat. Aiden says, "Oh, Don, my Don, where art thou?" Hello, Aiden. Thrift says, "I have a boyfriend. Should I tell my wife about him?" Yeah, you should. Ali says, "Are you interested in computer science?" I am not interested in that. Itchy Foreskin says, "Scoot away, Don, please. You're scaring me." Yeah, sorry about that earlier when I was zoomed in. King says, "I just sat on a fat cock. It was glorious." Okay. Bree says hi. Hello, Bree. Visna says, "May you read my messages." There you go. Tell or ask me anything in the chat. Bird says, "Don, how is it going, bro?" Good, thank you. Kenshi says, "What happened with yesterday's stream? Why is it not, like, watchable now? I privated it because it didn't meet my standards." Thrift says, "If I cut off my foreskin on my own, does that mean I'm circumcised?" Sure. Ali says, "Are you running an experiment?" No. Max says, "What are your thoughts on Taylor Swift?" I mean, my brain enjoys her music. King says, "If you could extend your life by 50 years by jacking off a walrus, would you do it?" No. Cheryl says hi. Hello, Cheryl. Programming says, "Are you okay?" Yes. Captain says, "Stop farting so much." I don't. Banana says, "What is blood yapping about?" Whatever you guys want. Kenshi says, "Do you enjoy philosophical discussions?" Yeah. Timu says, "If I give you my ex-boyfriend's number, will you ask him why he cheated on me with my sister?" No. Old School says, "You stole my catalytic converter." That wasn't me. Jamie says, "Hello, Don Juan Benitez." Hello, Jamie. King Julian says, "Do you shine your helmet with moisturizer or Vaseline?" No. Ghastly says, "How come you look like a Joe Pesci reject?" I don't know. Skillet says, "You look like that chick from Teen Spirits." What do you mean? What? Aiden says, "Don, how much for a foot job?" I don't do sex work. Dylan says, "Yes, the microwave shows all." What? Kanye says, "Hello, young spunk. Care for a drink?" Stop rubbing your eye, by the way. Yeah, I probably should try to stop doing that. Hey, it's Ava says, "Hey Don, do you remember me?" I remember your name. Gary says, looks like there's a bunch of morons in here. Okay. Bao says, are you Native American? Not that I'm aware of. Guy says, Don, did you study engineering at university? No. AD says, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the toughest blood of them all? I don't know. Stomp says, yo, Benny Ben. Hello, Stomp. Shane says, is that David Bowie? No. Aiden says, Don, I'm liking the new fit. New fit. I wear this all the time. What do you mean, new fit? Commander says, what's up, you slick bastard? Hello, Commander. Hi says, did you just smile? Yeah, I'm in a good mood, maybe. Adam says, schizo smile. Okay. 488 says, his meds probably give him dry eye, but make for strangely entertaining content. Okay. Wade says, you're on early tonight? Yeah, earlier than usual. Roger says, what's the go here? What goes on here? Just me reading chat. Adrian says, read faster, fam. Maybe I should do that, but I kind of enjoy this comfortable, slow pace. AK says, hey, could you please shout out my friend? Sorry, no. Lance says, Don, you look a lot better today. Usually you look a lot worse. Thank you. Stomp says, you also have slow mode on. Yeah, I do. It's for 1 minute. AZ says, Officer Poncherello. Okay. Dixon says, ever skinned a cat? No. Avery says, why do you look so tired? My personality. King says, the sperm of Edward Cullen and Bruno Mars in the flesh. Okay. Oh yeah, says Bastardo. I haven't heard of oh yeah in a long time. The bird inspector says, I like to eat pomegranates and talk to them. Okay. Gronky says, you ever see a kid screaming in public and think about punting them in football? Like a football? No. Facia says, first time here, what's going on? Just reading chat. Dylan says, this is an interesting specimen. Okay. Narek says, why tree in Japan it's pink? Are you talking about cherry blossoms? Itchy Foreskin says, Benitez, when is the haircut stream? Your hair is looking like a bird's nest. I think I'm gonna let it grow out. Jamal says, hello, my Hispanic Latino king. Hello, Jamal. Jay Lee says, Jake from State Farm? No. Anna says, do you have parents or a manufacturer? Parents. Sir says, another wonderful evening, and I have the pleasure to hear from you a second time. Hello, Sir Jacob. Wayne says, what a scary looking person. Okay. JR says, remember me from yesterday? Nope. Tricky says your eyes blink at different times sometimes. That's not good. I hope you're lying. Skillet says I have testicle fungus. Okay. Rich says ever drank slurm? What's that? Is that semen? No. Captain Cake says, are you the same in real life? Roughly. Itchy Foreskin says, will the FBI be looking into your betting scandals too? I don't gamble. Andrew says the things you do for attention. I mean, this isn't crazy. This is not wild. Luna says your head looks like Beavis and Butthead's hair. Okay. Kanye says you need my child to borrow. Nope. The Voice says when I see a transgender, I do not see a human. I see something fake. Disagree. BG says, can you turn your light down? You don't like the light? Maybe in a future stream it'll be less intense. Leslie says, are you smart? Thinking emoji. I don't know. Ratch says, hello. Hello, Ratch. X-Ray says, do you remember me? I remember your name. Visna says, bye, got to go. Wave emoji. Bye, Visna. Kenshi says, do you like Need for Speed? That's a game, right? I think I played it, one of the games. Robert says, I like wearing lace pink panties. Okay. Wise Farmer says, are you from there? What? June says, you look like you're turning into a werewolf. Okay. Alo says, go suck your own dick. No. Just says, do you like Red Hot Chili Peppers or Kings of Leon? Red Hot. Tube says, are you 6'7" year? What does that mean? DJ says, James hype bitch. What? Beck says, Dawn. Hello, Beck. Philip says, the Jews were lost in the desert for 40 years because one dropped a nickel. Okay. Hira says, you look like Indian actor Prem Chopra. Okay. Benny says, India technical support. Okay. Thick says, what the heck is going on here? Just reading messages. Wookie says, the average American reads 20 minutes per day. I guess I read more per day because I read the chat. Bazapi says, what if us two grown men ballroom dance in your room? Then I guess that would happen, but I'm not interested. Marty says, oh, it's the weird chat again. Yeah, this chat can be weird. JD says, no one is equal. That's a fallacy. Some people are beautiful, other people are ugly. I like to take the blue pill. Wise says, are you secretly a god observing human chat? No. Aiden says, Dawn, don't break my heart. I have a little gay crush on your cute little hiney. Not interested. Just a Person says, what if I told you the pills were fake? Erica says, go to sleep, bro, please. I'm not sleepy. Zur says, have you seen this man? What man? Nobody says our profile pictures are polar opposites. Yeah, it's a picture of you and you're all white, like a silhouette, but it's all white, like lit up. But my profile picture, I'm darkened out. Raymond says, a rational man's response to YouTube Shorts Live. Is that a compliment? Tomato Soup says, do you like tomato soup? No. Kanye says, sex in a self-driving car ethical? No. Black Rip says, do you like cats? Yeah. 9F says, boxers or G-string? Boxers. Jesse says, hi, hello, good sir. Hello, Jesse. Optical says, hey buddy, you're a cool guy, don't let anything get you down. Not from the chat at least, the bad messages don't harm me. Arab says, how's your day? Good, thanks. Sir Jacob says, why is every poo-poo time a pee-pee time, but not every pee-pee time a poo-poo time? I don't know. Cadence says, can you say congratulations on my divorce? No. The Ass Clown says, do you like Arby's beef and cheddar sandwich? I haven't tried it, but it doesn't look appetizing. Mister says, damn, Batman. Okay. Snaff says, Gabe Owners. You wanted me to say gay boners. Okay. It's cold today says, can you tell my math teacher to stop giving me thick packets every Friday? I'm sorry, I can't. Tony says, who's your celebrity crush? Don't have one. Hobo says, bungling fungus, fumbling gungus. Okay. Cart says, the Jewish Bruce Wayne. Yeah. Yer says, what do you think about steak nuggets? Haven't had them. Henry says, friend. Are we friends? No. Queen says, smile. You are on YouTube candid camera. I don't need to smile. Kenshi says, if I saw you in real life, would you let me take a picture with you? Sure, but I would think it's a little weird. But yeah, that it'd be cool, like seeing someone that knew me from here. Grem says, hop on Fortnite twin peace emoji. No. Legendary says, Minecraft stream win. Not in the foreseeable future. Wired says, nothing beats a Jet 2 holiday. Okay. Skillet says, is Roddy Rich your stepdad? No comment. Elliot says, you look like me too much. Okay. Just a Person says, do you know any good books to read? Religious texts. Myrtle says, money emoji, money emoji. Okay. Anna says, can you please say think, brain blast? Okay. Gunzo says, yeah, definitely trying us some weed. What? Nee says, what's up, playa? Hello, Nee. Bruce says, please explain the basics of a Fourier transform. I can't. I don't know what that is. Cannon says, are the Israelis great dancers? What? Mungus says, what time is it for you? Nighttime. Bazapi says, goated Jimmy Neutron reference. I'm also a millennial gay guy. Okay. Justin says, are you my brother? No. Big Bobo says, hello. Have you ever had pussy? Yes or no? No comment. Alumni says, Subdon. Hello, Alumni. Diablo says, did you kill my cat? No, I don't kill pets. Charlie says, please don't relapse. You've been doing so well. Stay away from the needle. Don't worry about me. Project says, I think you're my lost long brother. For real, for real. I'm not. Alb says, why do you seem so mad? I'm not mad. Frozen says, would you punch Whoopi Goldberg for 50K? No. Hobo says, the CIA bacteria in San Fran's foggy area. Okay. Mo says, will you say free Palestine? I mean, I'm not going to make any comments about that, but I'll read your messages. MMA says, are you capable of emotion? Yeah. Ronaldo says, what do you think of life without family crest to their family names? Are you asking if family crest, like the images, are cool? Sure. Aiden says, what's your least favorite minority? I don't have a least favorite minority. Everyone's equal. Jesse says, please, can you hold your nose and say my name's Squidward? No, sorry. June says, will you play tennis with me tomorrow? No, I don't know who you are. KM says, what religion scripture can you suggest? Sermon on the Mount. Charlie says, would you rather have sex with a woman that looks like a man or a man that looks like a woman? The person with a vagina. Derek says, are you a werewolf? No. Hates Ava says, can you do my computer science homework? Nope. Run says, is your undershirt gray? Yes. Light gray, dark gray. Callie says, nice setup. We can see you. You think it's an improved setup? Down says, do you believe in aliens? Sure, but I don't think we're ever gonna see them or make contact. Nothing says, what do you recommend for someone on acid? I don't have any recommendations. 1R says, dude definitely dresses up in women's clothing and has kids in bodies in basement. I don't do any of that. Haraf says, is this a social experiment? No. I mean, I guess it is in a way, but that's not why I do it, I think. Thrift says, how often do you measure your foreskin? I don't. Thought says, oh yeah, I can imagine him in some panties. That's not my style. I says, are you AI? No. Money Man says, have you seen anyone get caught popping pills? No. X-Ray says, should I go to sleep? Probably, yeah. Hobo says, this guy has a very wide range of emotions and inflection in his voice. Sarcasm. Richard says, stop punching puppies. I don't do that. Nothing says, is this deadpan comedy? I mean, if it's comedy, it's incidental. Like, I'm not trying to be funny. You know, the chat makes it funny. Nick says, how many men do you have tied up in your closet? I don't do that. Winston says, Jesus, okay. Mike says, have you ever cucked another man's wife? No. The Ass Clown says, is there any significance to you wearing gray? I just like the style. Callie says, I can't tell your frown from your smile. You should be able to. Jess says, you're a good man, Arthur Morgan. Okay. Negative Space says, I'm dumb. Are you? Kanye says, my album is out in December. Want a collab? Sure, but you're fake. You're not the real Kanye. Mr. Potato says, how much did you make starring in La Bamba? I didn't star in that. Kessel says, I'm in South Africa. Who are you, dude? My name's Don, and I live in North America. Elami says, remember we were on the bus and you helicoptered your dick in front of that old lady? Laughing emoji. No, I wouldn't do that. That's gross. Jacob says, 2025 memes are cringe. You agreed on? Yeah, but I mean, I still enjoy them, like, guiltily. Zavu says he would totally do that. No, I would not expose myself. Hi says you're lying. Nope. Jess says, you're a silly man, Arthur Morgan. A silly man. Okay. Bat says, I sexually identify as an attack helicopter. Okay. Says, hello person in the void. It looks like I'm in the void. Okay. Logan says, what kind of music do you listen to? Red Dead Redemption 2 PS4 dynamic theme music. Thrift says, what should I do with my spunk after it is placed on a napkin? Throw it away. Wouldn't says, hey Don, just passing through. Be well. Thank you. I hope your next shorts or whatever are good. VC says, he definitely looks like he listens to video game music. Yeah, I've played a lot of video games, so it makes sense. Negative Space says, Red Dead Redemption is for white supremacists. No. Finland says hello. Hello, Finland. Masa says, why Statue of Liberty in New York? I don't know why we put it there. Keeg says, what do you think of the saxophone? My ears like it. Un says, hello from Seattle. Hello. Aiden says, have you ever played Bloodborne? I owned it, but I never played it. Xenox says, do you think Goku can solo fiction? What? Kiru says, you look like a pred catch in the works. No, I'm never gonna end up in those videos. I'm never gonna be in a Gideon video. I don't message minors. Bar says, do you recommend becoming a monster and eating uranium? No. Callie says, how long you stream? How long is this stream gonna be? I'm gonna keep that a secret. Eric says, what's up, bro? How are you? I'm good, thank you, Eric. Kenneth says, Chippendale Rescue Rang, the Statue of Liberty, was originally for California, but when they shrunk it, they had to regrow it. That sounds fictional. Zach says, have you ever watched Paranormal State? No. R1 says, do you like the banjo? Yeah, I mean, I like every instrument. Bar says, do you like teeth? I'm glad that I have my teeth. Chunky says, at Alumni, remember when we took turns on Don Benitez, BBC in our furry costumes? You're talking to someone else in the chat asking if they remember doing that to me? I never experienced that, and I don't want that. Forsen says, are you a movie director from the 90s? No. Kanye says, sex in a self-driving car is ethical. I mean, you'd be having sex in public. That's not ethical. Zach says, what are your thoughts on magic with a K? Like dark magic? Haven't looked into it, but it sounds interesting. Dom says, spit in my mouth. It's very ethical, trust me. What? 9F says G.I. Joe or Barbie? Barbie. Thrift says, I had a dream about you last night. You finally let me rub that ointment on your chocolate starfish. Okay. Piss says, do you know Nick Fuentes? Yeah, and I'm not a groyper. No. Noah says, if you were disabled, which Special Olympics sport would you play? I don't know. Jay says, are you butt naked below your waist? No, I'm wearing pants. Mr. LB says, when does Walken get to stop paying child support? You're saying that I look like Walken? Okay. Corby says, can you help me on my driver's test tomorrow? No. There's plenty of resources online though. Ryan says, look like Silvio from The Sopranos. Okay. George says, why did you leave that nickel in my ass? I never had sexual relations with you. Frank says, I am dumb sofa king. Dumb? Okay. Jay says, is this live only for white people? No, everyone. Just a Person says, have you watched Dexter? You low-key seem like him. I've seen a few episodes. Cowboy says, can turtles be racist? Not like the way we are, but I have seen the videos of them not liking, like, the color, like black shoes for whatever reason. Baby says, do you wipe or do you let it crust? Wipe. James says, wait a minute, what are they trying to say about turtles being racists? Look it up on the internet. Lol says, I'm looking for a husband. Can you get married, please? I'm 25. Not interested. Jay says, do you know the YouTuber My Neighbor? No. Throw says, you ever shit so big you jizzed? No. Harvey says, hello. First, I have a serious question. I find myself heavily attracted to the streamer Candace Owens. What do you do? Because of that clip, that one clip, do you have to do anything about it? Just live with it, I guess. Colin says, have you been casting evil spirits towards me? No. Gran says, are you good at Clash? No, but I was okay at it in 2017. Hrafna says, I'm falling asleep with a belt around my neck. If you're referring to what I think you're doing, then you shouldn't do that. Jacob says, bro, what the hell is even being said? Good lord. Or a bunch of random stuff. Landon says, Candace fit in your mouth? Huh? R1 says, pull your hair straight back. Do you have a widow's peak? I'm not gonna touch my hair like that. Sacred says, message your bitch. What? Callie says, good night, good sir. Good night, Callie. Thrift says, thank you for last night, Don. I was able to climax 3 times in 2 minutes. We never did that. Sean says, send my homegirl some money. $ Emma 5 loan. You're asking for money in the chat? Okay. Kenshi says, do you think euthanasia is ethical? I'm not too sure. Joey says, thank you, Lord Vishnu, for coming in a form of a fish. Okay. James says, Christ is king. Okay. Thomas says, I want to take Candace Owens to Popeyes. Okay. Chong says, why do you take abuse from these motherfuckers? I mean, this isn't abuse. Maybe it would be, like, feel like abuse if this was in person, but this is just text on a screen. Pepe says, this dude is a weirdo. Okay. Chronic says, do you have smegma cheese? No. Humberto says, I'm driving. Don't chat and drive. Chris says, are you just reading people's messages because people are fucking roasting you? Yeah, that's what I'm doing, and I don't mind that. Jess says, how do you feel about religion? Do you think it's too closed off? Or do you think being spiritual is better? Well, I don't think any of the religious texts are real, but they're interesting. Crow says, stay still, I'm almost there. I'm gonna stay still, but not because of that. Mani says hi. Hello, Mani. Kenshi says, Michael Jackson best album. I've never listened to any of his albums, like, back to front to back, I mean. Monster says, men can't be women. Disagree. Alex says, your hair is impeccable. Thank you. Joey says, if I had 1,000 pesos, it would be equal to how many US dollars? I don't know. Pang says, okay. TX says, is this an Angry Bird? I'm not an Angry Bird. Frozen says, favorite Chinese takeout dish? Orange chicken, like the average person. Raya says, you look like you either love Jesus or your mom. Okay. Piss says, you ever been to a Don Benitez freak-off? I don't do that. Rico says, you like rap music? Nope. Joseph says, pondering your age might give me an aneurysm. Well, I'm not an adult, that's a hint. A. Sean says, next person says a hate comment is gay. Okay. Suzanne says, why are you acting like a clanker? Because having personality is exhausting. And I guess you're gay because of that comment I read a second ago. Alumi says, you're not an adult. Did I accidentally say that? What I meant to say is that I am an adult. Chronic says, I have foreskin. Okay. Landon says, want to drink Bailey's from a shoe? No. Shannon says, you're so cool. Thank you. X says, stroke it for me, bro? No. Baby says, are whales real? If so, is it okay to eat your poop? Whales are real, and it is not okay to eat your poop. Alf says, do you still miss the bed? Miss the bed? What do you mean? TX says, are you a flat earther? No. Captain says, I'll just say hello. Have a good one. Thumbs up emoji. You too, Captain. Gumbell says, how long did he put slow mode for? 1 minute. 9F says, do you always wear the same style and color of shirts so you never have to think about what you wear? That's a factor. Monster says, are you almost done transitioning? I'm not a transgender. Barry says, are you an only child? Maybe. Raya says, never seen more expressionless eyes in my life. There's much more expressionless people than me. Kevin says, Big Don, keep killing it. Thank you, Kevin. Baby says, Scooby Dooby Doo coming after your poo. Okay. Tara says, did he play League or Elden Ring? No. Danny says, hi from Philippines. Hello, Danny. Thrift says, when you wash, do you pull the foreskin back to get rid of the dick cheese? No comment. Tanya says, you look like a male version of me. Okay. Chronic says, if I super chat, will you strip? I mean, I don't have super chats enabled, but if they were, that no deal still. Rune says, Shadow Man is in the chat. He steals your poop. Okay. Man, I need help says, laughing emoji, laughing emoji. Okay. Raya says, agreed. You do look like a lesbian. A cool one, though. A cool one. Okay. Shelby says, would you put a mouse trap on your tongue? No. Piss says, do you play your tiny chest hairs like a tiny harp? Nope. Cowboy says, you kind of look like Scarlett Johansson. I don't think so. Vivid says, bro gets no poon. Okay. Monster says, you're so brave to share your transition journey with all of us online. I'm proud of you. I'm not a transgender. Kenneth says, do you work for NASA? No. Isaac says, would you smile if you had a child? Yeah, that would make smiling easier. I mean, yeah. Chunky says, oil me again, my Hispanic Latin king. I've never done that to you. Beefy says, you look like Gen Z Mowgli. Okay. Super says, have you heard of Bofa? What's Bofa? Braden says, bro, if you don't want to watch Avocado, please watch Vava. What? Zhang says, are you God? No. Coolin says, did you grow up playing Little Big Planet? No. Jacob says, you look like a good, young, solid man. Thank you. Jonathan says, I'm drunk. Okay. Landon says, do you drive a 2009 Subaru Outback? Maybe. Frozen says, Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat? Mortal Kombat. I haven't played Street Fighter too much. Harold says, watch out for Jacob. Okay. Baby says, have you ever seen a live wire and just want to lick it? What's that? Numex says, I heard your grandma finally had a baby. Congrats on the son. You got the wrong person. Rico says, are you depressed? No. Kenshi says, the chat is getting boring. Not for me, but sorry, not for me. Thought says, do you nut when you take a big dump? No. Turret says, get a haircut. I don't have plans to. I want it long. South says, this is my favorite type of autism. Thank you. Liz says, can you play a video game, please? While talking in that soothing voice. Yeah, maybe one day. Yeah. Thrift says, no lie, bro. You bring me so much happiness to me with this stream. I want to thank you. Thank you. Monster says, I bet you're struggling with such denial during your transition. No, because I'm not transitioning. Zane says, are you Barry from Barry and Jamar Go to Crystal Burger? No, and I don't know what that is. Braden says, have you heard the song named Kaka? No. Rico says, do you love your parents a lot? Yeah. Joey says, I read Mein Kampf and the Art of War in 12 hours. You've read The Art of War? Okay. Shelby says, do you tell your friends you think of them before bed? No. Lol says, this reminds me of Neville Paperman when he blackmails Carly from his secret computer room. Okay. Person says, do you think Christmas is overrated? Sure. Germany says, you gay? I'm not. Tara says, I agree with the people saying you have a good voice. You should stream or read. I mean, I am reading. Thomas says, what if you were walking and running late for work when I accidentally run into you and I fall, but when I came, you pulled me up and we look in the eyes and we kiss? What a weird fantasy you have. Chronic says, I like to peg myself while watching iCarly. Okay. Gall says, shut the fuck up, chatter, and let him read. Piece of shit. I mean, I need chat messages to read, so. Zhang says, you and Chills should do a collab. Chills like Burger King foot lettuce. Is that the guy? Coolian says, do you feel like a bimbo Barbie when singing in the shower? I don't sing in the shower. Turret says, do you ever break character? I mean, I'm not playing a character. If you're asking, do I laugh sometimes? Yeah, definitely. Chunky says, I love the stream. Thank you for your service, my Hispanic Latin king. You're welcome. Kay says, how many teddy bears do you sleep with every night? I don't sleep with teddy bears. Josh says, dude, you can sing and make money. Okay. Commander says, what age did you realize you're gay? I haven't realized yet. Thoughts says, what are your thoughts on plans for expanding access to essential services like mental health care, considering workforce shortages? Well, I like it. Gumbell says, yo, wait, I found a guy who copies your content. His name is Daily Vlog 1. Are you lying? Kenshi says, have you ever taken a piece of food out of your teeth and eat it again? Yeah. Someone says hello. Hello. Area says, do you eat foreskin cheese? No. Gladys says, you are cute, laughing my ass off. Okay. Bazapi says, I have to bite down on a belt when I watch Dawn because I get excited. Okay. The Ass Clown says, did you ever have the Grand Big Mac? No. Gull says, he's lying. I watched Daily Vlog 1. It fucking sucks. He's lying. There's no one copying my content. Okay. Brewski says, do you peg yourself with a hot dog? No. Josh says, do you ever question humanity after reading 10 minutes of chat? No, I already knew it was everyone's a sinner. Daniel says, this isn't clever, it won't last. What? Big Mike says, if you ever wanted to know what undiagnosed autism looks like, this is it. It is? Okay. Luke says, I found a way to make my wiener 14 inches. I folded it in half. So you have a 28-inch long genitalia? I don't believe that. Commander says, do you sleep in a coffin? Nope. Bazapi says, thanks for reading my silly comments, man. You're welcome. Landon says, ever cuzzle your own gum? What? Area says, are you Skibbity Toilet 79? No. Kenshi says, do you consider yourself mature and wise? No. Slim says, you should sleep in a coffin. No, that sounds uncomfortable. Zhang says, are you a lizard person? No. Cam says, this guy seems like he's mad about everything. I'm not. Brewski says 6'7". Okay. Rico says, is this entertaining for you? Yeah, this is more entertaining than most books I've read. Jocelyn says, do you live in Deep South? Maybe. Growing says, what is your favorite chess opening? I usually move one of my middle pawns, like the pawns close to the middle, two spaces forward. I don't know the technical terms. I'm not a real chess player. JB says, your mom? Okay. Don Benitez says, hi, Don. Hello, my doppelganger. Shadow says, sexy ass Jew boy. Thank you. Larry says, use code Diddy in the item shop. I doubt that's real. Larry says, your chat trying to get your number? Sometimes. Thomas says, what's better, cat owners or dog owners or slave owners? Well, definitely not slave owners, dog owners. KLE says, will you get a thick nose ring? No, that's not my style. Orc says, you look like Charlie Kirk if I drew him with my left hand. Okay. Baby says, it's been 1 minute without Deep Woken and I'm already insane. 1 minute. Are you complaining about the slow mode? Dom Benitez says, can I use some of your shampoo? No. Landon says, I casually say YC instead of YN. Why? Alejandro says, do you sleep with your eyes open? I might. Someone told me that I did. A few people, I think. Cowboy says, I think he might be a prophet. I'm not. Devin says, could you do me a huge favor? Please accept my invite so I can get a gifts copy. What the hell are you trying to do? DH says, what do you do when you're not on here? Waste time watching stuff like YouTube videos. Chronic says, can I lick your leather Cheerio? No. Landon says, I hate my wife. She treats me like shit. Okay. Purple says, would you rather have a theme song play every time you enter a room, or have a laugh track play after everything you say? Definitely a theme song. That having a laugh track would make everything I say into a joke. Thrift says, I just took a rhino pill. I have 2 minutes before I get a huge erection. What should I do next? I mean, maybe there's some way to like stop it from happening. Maybe search up the internet for like a way of that. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to deal with it. I love food says hello. Hello, I love food. Highest says, if there was a way to morph into a werewolf, would you? Sure. Colin says, first time I did butt stuff, it was nothing like the online stuff. There was no poo at all. Okay. Antonio says, y'all so childish. This guy seems like a decent guy. Okay. 5 Mike says, you look like Charlie Kirk and Nick Fuentes fused together. Okay, I've never been told that. Orlando says, indica or sativa? Sativa? Arctic says, winter's coming. Yeah, it is. D says, talk about yourself instead of reading our dumb chats. No. I mean, the chat is what makes live streaming special. Like, if I were to just talk about myself, I would make it a video. Ethan says, have you ever strangled a small animal? No. Chronic says, I'm pegging myself to your stream. Okay. The bird inspector says, I forgot to tell you that I just cracked my fiance. That's why I was gone. Okay. Kira says, he 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 he. Okay. Doctor says, there is a roach on your wall, bro. I don't think so. I don't get cockroaches, luckily. Landon says, sexual assault is wrong. Yeah. Dark says, you seem kind of disgusted with us. I mean, sometimes I am because chats can be weird, but yeah. I like to laugh says, are you warm? No. Chad says, chicken burger. Okay. Corey says, do you like old movies? They look good, but they're boring often, usually. Musa says, make eye contact with the camera. I'm almost finished. I mean, it's a part of the stream, so you're in luck. Baby says, have you seen a 120 volts wire and just want to lick it? No, that sounds dangerous. Just a Person says, do you listen to Sleep Token? No. Hood says, good job not breaking character. I wasn't trying to not break character. I'm okay with laughing. I'd prefer to laugh more. Turth says, when will you release the people you abducted? I don't kidnap people. Chad says, I'm pregnant with Clash Royale. Okay. Brizzy says, when are you getting monetized and I can send a gift? Probably this month. I don't know if I will enable gifts though. I would just prefer super chats. I don't know if I want like hearts and like emojis all over the screen, like 1 floating heart, 2 floating heart. I don't know if that's my thing. I think I would just prefer like money. Danny says, please let us out. I did not kidnap you. Thrift says, who are your top 3 commenters? Please say I'm one of them. I mean, if someone asked me, like, who are your regular people that join your stream, I might list you in, like, the top 10 people. Turth says, Cap, you still haven't given my family back. I don't kidnap people. Baby says, did you go to high school? And if so, what did you learn? Yeah, I did. I learned about... I mean, I forgot most of it. Melissa says, scream loudly. No. June says, do you smell your dog's feet? No. Gecko says, exacting many pairs of pants do you own? How many pairs of pants do I own? What's my estimation? Like 5. Blake says, your eyes are captivating. I'm so close. Okay. Isaac says, you like spicy food? Yeah. Cowboy says, I feel like we could be best friends from another dimension. Okay. Don Benitez says, Big Don only feeds me potato skins and apple cores. Big Don says, I can't come to the light yet, but soon. I'm not kidnapping people. Toasty says, you look like a coked out Charlie Sheen. Okay. Grady says, sup, dildo. Hi. Joey says, fornicate with a bull, dyke, lesbian. No. Alien says, dog, do you get enough sleep? Today I did. Yesterday I didn't. Useless Square says, yo, is your eye okay? It looks red. I mean, it feels okay. Siphon says, do you get tired of answering stupid questions? No. Brianna says, do you like it on YouTube? Streaming on YouTube as opposed to Twitch? Yeah. Salvation says, are you a werewolf? No. Abdul says, Jesus is not God. He's the messenger of Allah. I'm not religious, so I don't believe in any of that. Robert says, have you ever jerked off 3 dicks at the same time? No. Gabriel says, hey Don, what do you do for work? Gonna keep that private. BL says, Muslims like kids. Okay. Dot says, please tell me, is it weird to have spicy food on any occasion? Is it bad to have spicy food often? No. Kenshi says, I'm going to sleep now. Good night, Don. Trophy emoji. Good night, Kenshi. Tranquility says, who do you think was actually behind 9/11, Don? I believe the mainstream media, so I believe, Laden. Larry says, Don, is your ass held at gunpoint? No. Pavan says, are you feeling sleepy? No. Landon says, Al-Qaeda? Yeah. Jackson says, hi. Hello, Jackson. Shira says, it's all over the screen. Okay. Robert says, it appears you're a sheep if you believe mainstream. Yeah, I am a sheep. Dylan says, I love your answers to the getting tired of answering dumb questions. You like that I don't get bored of dumb questions? Okay. Superior says, choose one, Hermes or Apollo. Apollo. Fozy says, LGBT flag emoji. Okay. Guitar says, when did you realize that you were in my walls? I'm not in your walls. Alien says, you remind me of Danny Duncan. He's a lot more energetic than I. Steam says, what is your favorite thing? Family members. Mud says, seat sniffer reporting for duty. You sniff seats, like seats of chairs? Okay. Pavan says, you remind me of Vampire Diaries. Okay. Cowboy says, can you name your favorite Linkin Park song? I don't listen to Linkin Park, but I'm sure I enjoy them though. Like, I don't know the names of songs, but I enjoy all music. Get Them Out says, are you a pedophile? No. I Like to Laugh says, bro has such burritable earlobes. Burritable earlobes. Okay. Colin says, have you seen Fred Byers on YouTube or Zach Gray? Yeah. Yeah, I have. Kangaroo says, the Bay Harbor Butcher. Okay. Mud says, let's meet up in Papa Joey's dungeon. No. Alien says, in my opinion, you look similar to Danny. Okay, it's the appearance, not the personality, the appearance. Okay. Don Benitez says, I got so hard and fell so far. In the end, my dick went splatter. You're like vandalizing Linkin Park lyrics. Okay. Ryan says, bro, you doing okay? You look like you purr fighting back tears. I look like I'm gonna cry. I'm fine. Jitesh says, making you after a very long time, bro. Happy to see you. Are you saying that you haven't seen me in a long time? It's hello, Jitesh. Long time no see. JR says, do you have a girlfriend, bro? No comment. D says, did you have sausage today? No. Kenneth says, can I get a massage? Happy ending from you? I don't do happy endings nor massages. Eacker says, how long is a China man? What? Purple says, would you rather have unlimited happiness or unlimited knowledge? Unlimited happiness. Monty says, this must be a homophobic slur from your school. Don't even listen. Are you talking about never mind. Mud says, woo, 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 woo. Okay. Guitar says, do you know how to drive a manual transmission? No. Femboy Stormtrooper says, howdy. Hello, Femboy Stormtrooper. Iron says, have you made any money from answering mundane questions? Not yet. Growing says, I live in the country and once threw a raccoon in a bonfire because he was trespassing. Okay. Kyle says, bro, I like this guy. Okay. Lando says, it took me eating 17 corn puffs on the 8th of July to realize that maybe if I eat only corn puffs my whole life just keeps being bad. Okay. Turret says, do you lift? I don't exercise. Zenox says, who is your favorite anime character? I don't know. No Face. When he's big and eating people, though, only that part. Or like when he's getting all those gifts. Not Comfortable says, why is this chat so obsessed with the thought of you being gay? I don't know. Stock says, please say barbecue chicken alert. Okay. Don Benitez says, if Jesus is Hesus, then Joe must be a hoe. If Jesus is Hesus, what? Kangaroo says, what do you call a group of trans women? X-Men? Okay. JP says, when did you sell your soul? When I was born. Eggpalm says, did you ever go to SawCon? What's SawCon? Thrift says, I think you gave me herpes. I told you to wear that Magnum and you said no. Now I'm pregnant. Wrong person. Brutus says, say Bernie is a good boy because he's a good boy. No. Femboy Stormtrooper says, do you care for the television program The Sopranos? I mean, it looks interesting. I haven't watched it. Stock says, would you take BBC for 100 million? No. Back says, who'd win? Diabetic Spider-Man without insulin or paraplegic Batman? No comment. Baby says, Jesus is the Son of God and is God. Galatians 6:7. God can't be mocked. You will reap what you sow. Okay. Computer says, what this twink yapping about? I'm reading chat messages. Roberta says, I never said that you said my name, and then you said a different person's comment. I said your name and then said a message you didn't send, like I misaligned them. Sorry. Femboy Stormtrooper says, who'd win in a fight between Arthur Morgan and Arkham Batman? Batman. Doctor says, I want to give you my seed. No thanks. Oryx says, how often do you shower? I used to do it every day, but now it's like every 2 days. Baby says, is it normal to hear voices? No. Coolian says, if Nicki Minaj fought Cardi B, who'd win? Nicki Minaj. Computer says, hey bro, why were you absent from Discord Femboy server yesterday? I'm not in a Femboy server like you. Growing says, reading books can get old. Yeah, it can. Tom says, bro, you a vampire? I'm not. Scully says, how long do your streams last? Hours. Burger Kyle says, read this, buddy. There you go. P-Dub says, what's your most important life goal? My most important goal? To be happy. Kangaroo says, could he give tips on how to grow your channel? Well, if you're gonna live stream vertically, you get more viewers that way. Joey says, have you ever flipped your boner into your waistband? No. Computer Geek says, were you sore from day before yesterday? What? Xenox says, do you prefer 90s anime or new gen anime? I mean, I don't really watch anime, so I don't have an opinion. Gabriel says, hey Don, name one of your favorite bands. The Cure. Jenny says, how old are you? I'm an adult, that's what I'll say. Larry says, was your greatest grandpa in the National Socialist Germany War? No. Split says, do you have hyper violent dreams as I do? No, I don't have violent dreams like you. Sheep says, you're ignoring me. Say sheep like grass, yum yum, la la la. Okay. Turret says, most viewers you've had at once. I'm not sure. It's either 300 or 500. I try to not pay attention, that I find it like distracting. Kenneth says, can you kick into hyper mode in and out anytime you want? What? Femboy Stormtrooper says, if you could have one superpower, what would it be? I mean, read minds. Yeah. Frankie says, you have a gun to your head. Would you rather pull out your tongue or an eyeball? My tongue. No. Yeah, maybe probably my tongue. Tyrone says, you look like all the Spider-Man actors combined. Okay. Chad says, any shows you're watching currently? No TV shows. I usually waste my time on YouTube. Bree says, have you heard of Maurix? Maurix? No. I mean, that sounds familiar, but... Dick says, you look like Glenn from Child's Play. Okay. Quick says, favorite YouTuber? Salsi1. Braden says, who is the Italian brain rot with the cup for a head and is a ballerina? Ballerina Cappuccina? Ancient says, I stopped by just to click like button. Okay. Isaac says, he looks like a lot of famous Hollywood people. Okay. Tammy says, would you rather lick Rosie Donald's asshole or suck Whoopi Goldberg's dick? No comment. Archie says, you kinda look high. Okay. Split says, a forest. You're talking about the song. Oric says, have you been mistaken for a lesbian? I mean, not in real life, but people say that in the chat. JA says, can you roar like a tiger? I'm not gonna do that. Scully says, do you stream on Twitch? No. Mars says, do you have a job? Maybe. I'm gonna keep that private. And thank you for censoring job. Mantis says, did you see the airplane explode? What airplane? Just says, I'm sleeping in my truck. Okay. MK says, bro, you look high. Okay. Cowboy says, can you give us your best impression of a turtle? I'm not gonna do that. Quick says, get off the internet. That might be good advice, but I'm addicted. Robin says, opinions on the Greek Orthodox Church. I don't know church stuff. I just know a little about the Bible, and that's it. Nee says, do you make music? No. Coolian says, can you do the best impression of a gay man? Like the accent thing, I'm not gonna do that. Femboy Stormtrooper says, do you like the YouTube channel Red Letter Media? No. I mean, I don't watch a channel called that. That sounds familiar, though. Anthony says, I bet you watch animes. I don't. The Holy Power says, give your life to Jesus, man. No. Fire says, Smosh. You like the YouTube channel Smosh? Okay. I don't watch them. Kenneth says, I need one more Dragon Ball. I think it's stuck in your eyes. I'm not taking out my eyes for you. Split says, God is dead. Yeah. Alex says, what is this live about? Me reading your messages. Kanye says, hello, my young love, my young sperm. Will you let me put you in a nappy? Will I let you put me in a nap? No. Rev says, you look like you have a business degree and don't use it. Maybe. Maybe I do. Archie says, holy NPC. Okay. Don Benitez says, boy over here looking like Nike Pro. What does that mean? Wait, does that mean lesbian? Kangaroo says, what do you think of Indian food? I haven't had it. Matthew says, God is real and Jesus lives. I don't think so, but thank you. Alec says, do you hate life? No. Valley says, Donnie, have you been to a Turkish prison? No. Kenneth says, can you tell me who to stop Miku drinking so much in Fortnite? What? Lord says, dude, who the fuck did you murder? Nobody. Don Benitez says, it means a fat dumpy. What? Femboy Stormtrooper says, last time I seen you live, you said that you will be deleting your channel. Yeah, I was gonna do that, but I changed my mind. I'm gonna remain live streaming here for months, maybe years. Metal says creep with the ease with the letter 3 instead of ease. Creep. Okay. Gwen says, what's your favorite slur? I don't have one. Braden says, who is the shark with Nike shoes? I'm not sure. I'm not too informed on Italian brain rot. Kenneth says, murder Mikio, she was too drunk. What are you talking about? Rich says, if God doesn't exist, who made all this? That's a mystery. Unknowable. Thrift and Things says, what's the best position you and your boyfriend enjoy the most? I don't have homosexual sex. John says, would you be friends with a Jewish person? Yeah. Lord says, you are exactly like Louis C.K. I don't think so. Aiden says, me and my wife are listening to you to fall asleep. Good night, Don. You're listening to this and falling asleep? Okay. Bree says, Dawn, it's pronounced Maru. It's a dark wave post-punk goth band. Okay, maybe I'll look them up. Turret says, where do you think you'll be in a year? I'm not gonna say. Scully says, for some reason, I really like watching your streams. Okay. Mommy's Hot says, anyone want to be friends? Not me. We can be fake friends, though. Gwen says, Israel or Palestine? No comment. Marcelo says, you look scary, man. Okay. Kanye says, I need to jerk my body on your soul. What? Femboy Stormtrooper says, are you a gamer? I play Minecraft occasionally. I used to be a real gamer back in the day, though. KLE says, what guy would you want to be stuck on an island with? Someone that won't try to sexually assault me. JFam says, I'm making a mod of Minecraft for peaceful players so they can win the game as well. I like the sound of that. I was kind of thinking about like peaceful mode, and like I don't play peaceful mode, but I was thinking about peaceful mode earlier, and I was thinking about like a mod that would do something like that, so that's cool. Toad says, do you like eggs? Yeah. Thrift says, have you ever used jizz as hair gel? No. Grady says, do you consume or devour? Consume. Lord says, let's take a look at Paul Allen's card. Okay. Like says, PB&J or grilled cheese? If I had to choose, grilled cheese. KLE says, do you like amusement parks? I want to say no, but to be honest, yeah, I do. Massive says, massive forehead. Okay. Rando says, I'm back on, but I'm about to call it a night. Hello and good night, Rando. Melissa says, you have beautiful eyes. Okay. Brig says, can you do a backflip? Wrong streamer. Guy says, what is the proof that all of us in chat are real? Does it matter if we're real or not? Schmuck says, favorite amusement park. I remember going to a Six Flags amusement park. I don't know which one, but I like that one. Kanye says, stream my music, Bully, Donda, and Vultures with Ty Dolla $ign. Okay. Arctic says, In-N-Out or Chick-fil-A? Well, I prefer burgers over chicken, so In-N-Out. Marcelo says, I saw a shadow behind you. What was that? Nothing was there. Split says, nothing is irrelevant. Okay. Don Benitez says, Don, would you like to fly to my island? You just have to sign in. I have to sign in your, like, black book? No, I'm good. Femboy Stormtrooper says Simpsons or South Park? Simpsons. Orlando says, do any comments ever hurt your feelings? Never seriously hurt my feelings, no. USO says, do what it does, don't do what it don't do. What? Dawn Smells Like Feet says, kiss Daniel Larson or eat EDP 445's poo. Kiss Daniel Larson. Rich says, favorite dictator? Kim Jong-un. Melissa says, what is 6 plus 7? 13. Jess says, good night, Dawn. Good night, Jess. Bree says, pink or brown? I don't have a vagina. Mr. Nice Guy says hi. Hello, Mr. Nice Guy. Philomosity says hashtag I drops Don. Yeah, I should do that. Thank you for the reminder. Schmuck says, oh, what? Ray says, what would he do for a Klondike bar? Nothing, I don't want one. Bree says, do you like horror films? Yeah. Shadow Hunter says, dude. Okay. James says, please don't kill anyone. I don't plan to. Dat Burb says, have you ever been hit so hard by a wet spaghetti noodle that your first cousins are going on space trips? No. Femboy says, do you care for the Terrifier movies? I mean, I enjoy every movie. I haven't watched the Terrifier movies, though. Gemma says, roses are red, violets are blue. I'm a bad gardener. What? Haya says, would you wear clothes at an NFL football game? Yeah. Tyler says, do you believe in the devil? No. Cowboy says, we should combine forces against the elites. I'm good. I don't want to do that. Glob says, do you like SpongeBob? Sure. Growing says, my father is a world-class 10-plus Grand Night champion raccoon hunter. Your father is a raccoon hunter. Okay. Kanye says, it is actually me. Yay. As in Kanye West. I am in rehab. Okay. Oryx says, would you let me hit if we were the last people on Earth to procreate? Probably, yeah. Tirth says, inactive is a glasses because the shuttle blended some poop. What? Dad says, bro, how much have you smoked tonight? Nothing, Dad. Lori says, indica or sativa? Sativa. Quick says, do you season your chicken? No. Marcus says, does E.T.'s dick tip glow like his finger? No comment. Fire says, my great-grandfather was a prized bison hunter. Okay. Tirth says, buttered refrigerator is a yoga mat. What? Love says, Star Wars or Star Trek? I mean, I've only watched Star Wars. Cowboy says, ever been to a sausage party? No. Insert says, how many states have you been to? Like 7. Don't Be Dumb says, can you make hot dog nunchucks and a meatloaf sword? Well, I'm not gonna try to. Daniel says, is this the fastest way to get subs these days? No. If you make good videos, that's faster. Melissa says, do you know who Daft Punk is? Yeah, I do. Wade says, can I be your mod, please? Why? I don't ban people. BL says, yo, it's you again. Hello, BL. Lori says, what do you like to do? Video edit. Turth says, Don Benitez, thumbs up emoji. Ram, the animal emoji. Okay. Lance says, Nick Fuentes or Shapiro. No comment. James says, what is the first time you ever in your whole life began to start something? What do you mean by that? Toon says, Bruce Wayne, if he didn't train. I'm a weak Bruce Wayne. Okay. Lauren says, when you got your first kiss, did you flatly say, I am feeling love? I'm not this cold and with my friends. Turth says, are you an AI? No. Allie says, are you looking forward to monetization? Yes and no. I'm happy about the money, but it might make the stream slightly worse. It's only slightly, though. Bree says, drink some water, Don. I'll drink Coke in a second. Explodo says, what is happening here? Me reading messages. Tyler says, what happens when you die? Nobody knows. It's unknowable. Jade says, why is your room yellow? I don't know why my walls are painted tan. Balls says, are they making gay AI entities now? I'm a gay AI entity. Okay. Isaac says Coke, cherry Coke, or vanilla Coke. I think I prefer just Coke. I'm drinking cherry because no reason. Femboy Stormtrooper says, I assume death is like what it was like before you were born. Yeah. Egg Grain says, everyone has a little shit on their ass. I guess so, but I don't want to think about that. Like particles, yeah. Lauren says, what's your ideal party? Well, it wouldn't have freak-offs, I know that. The Flannel says, don't read this message. Well, I did, sorry. Chris says, yo. Hello, Chris. Daniel says, why have I subbed? That's for you to answer. I don't know. Rich says, if all the blood vessels in the human body were laid end to end, they would stretch around the earth twice. I can't really picture that, like imagine that. Potato says, what's your favorite type of femboy? I mean, I never watch or interact with femboys. Zaturo says, I gotta sleep. You should do that. The Ass Clown says, have you ever put a cold butter knife between your butt cheeks? No. Toon says, this is AGI, learning human behavior. You think I'm AI? Okay. Serpent says, bro, my ex pictured myself with for the rest of my life, wants nothing to do with me now. Sorry to hear that. Marcelo says, I am waiting for you in a graveyard. I'm not gonna come. Ali says, did you get a Big Mac today? Yeah. Lance says, isn't it obvious that this world is made by a creator? It's not obvious to me. It seems just unknowable, like just impossible to know. Taz says, what's your favorite movie? Eyes Wide Shut. Leo says, what does IDK mean? I don't know. BL says, if you get monetized, will you have mods in here? Why would monetization make me want to get mods? Tyler says, do you know what the Higgs field is? No. Adrian says, why is your hair different? I don't know. I just let it do its thing. Rich says, so all of this is an accident? I don't know. Like I said, it's like a mystery to me. Wade says, can you turn your microphone up a little? I don't know how you do that. I don't think you can with the way I'm using my phone to record. Daniel says, where in the US you from? Not gonna say. Gemma says, how much wood can a woodchuck chuck? I don't know. Femboy says, ever been to Canada? Maybe. Custom One says, hi. Hello, Custom. Adrian says he doesn't want to get doxxed. Yeah, I don't. But maybe in the future I'll be like really open about stuff. Gonzo says, serious question, how long do you make these videos? These live streams go on for hours. P says, these mics says you can touch the rim. What? Not Zay says, bro, you have so rich hair, I'm jealous. You're jealous of my hair? Okay. Madman says, what's the worst thing you've ever done? Not gonna say. Krypton says, you look telegenic. Why not become an actor? Telegenic, is that like photogenic but for the television? I don't want to become an actor. That doesn't interest me. Rich says, it's impossible to hum while pinching your nose. I'm not gonna try. Eric says, dude, love your vids. Thank you. Adrian says, he doesn't want to tell you all of the people he has killed. I haven't killed people. The Ass Clown says, do heart attacks scare you? Sure. Lauren says, what's one of your interests that might surprise people? Well, I don't know if this is technically an interest, but I know how to ride a unicycle. Turret says, what is your profile picture? It's a picture of me, but I'm blackened out. Necessary says, I just posted my second clip on YouTube from my Battlefield stream. You stream Battlefield? Okay. Peter says, I know that your ass broke on your dad's cock. No comment. Chad says, shout out from Millbrook, First Nation. Okay. Taylor says, how many unicycles